The world's population is growing by 1.1% per year, or approximately an additional 83 million people annually. Join us as we take a deep dive into the fascinating world of population growth by country and explore how it impacts the lives of individuals. Our research question for this research is, how do factors such as a country's GDP, health statistics, and average life expectancy affect its population growth rate? This research is relevant because population growth rate is a key indicator of country's state of health and development. High growth rates are typically associated with young population, struggles with healthcare, infrastructure, and education, and a high fertility rate, whereas low growth rate is typically associated with an aging population that struggles with a declining workforce, a stagnant economy, and typically has a low fertility rate. These are our data sources for this project. Our data sources were from the World Population Dataset, the World Development Indicators by Countries, Gross Domestic Product, Fertility Rate, and Life Expectancy at Birth, which are all linked here. These datasets give a different statistics on country information such as GDP, the number of children per household, and fertility rates. The first two datasets are from Kaggle, and the last three are from the World Bank. In these datasets, there were some NA values, but I don't believe these impacted our findings too much because when doing our analysis, we filtered them out.
To start answering our questions on population growth rate, we wanted to get a sense of which countries have the highest growth rates and which countries have the lowest growth rates. To do so, we created a world map showing the varying population growth rates around the world. As you can begin to see, the top 5 countries in terms of growth rate as a percentage are Syrian Arab Republic, Niger, Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We see these countries are mostly located in the sub-Saharan region of Africa and are colored in a greeny yellow shade. The countries with lower growth rates are colored in a darker bluey green or purple color. Next, since economic factors play a major role in a country's characteristics, we mapped out the world's countries in terms of gross domestic product in tens of billions of dollars. As you can see here, countries with a higher GDP are colored in purple and dark blue, and poorer countries are shown in light green and yellow. Clearly, the United States and China have 2 of the highest GDPs, while regions such as Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are much poorer. This gives us a sense of the possible connections between GDP and population growth rate. When looking at the top 5 fastest growing populations, we can see that they also have some of the lowest GDPs. Next, we zoom into some of the more specific influential factors that affect population growth rates around the world. Here, we see average life expectancy by country on the x-axis and the average number of children in a family by country on the y-axis. We created a scatter plot to show correlation between these 2 characteristics and calculated the correlation coefficient using the Pearson method. As you can see, these 2 variables are highly correlated with an R value of negative 0.85. Clearly, the shorter you expect to live, the more children you have, and the more children there are per family, and the higher the population growth will be of that country. Longer life expectancy indicates a higher GDP, as there are more and better resources in healthcare, education, and security for the average individual. We now understand that the average number of children per family is a strong factor in predicting the population growth rate of a country.
So we decided to highlight the population growth of the top 20 countries between the years 1970 and 2022. You can see that there's a large variability in the top 20 countries of just their population size overall. And you can see that China and India have grown a lot in population over the past 30 years. And yeah. This graph highlights the top countries in the graph of the top 20 countries in population growth. It highlights the countries that have over around 1.5% population increase per year in their population. Those countries are the DR Congo, Nigeria, Indonesia, and India. This graph shows the top countries who spent the most, the top 20 countries who spent the most percentage of GDP spent on healthcare. These countries overall mostly are highly developed countries such as the United States, Switzerland, Sweden, Germany, France, which makes a lot of sense. They have like a high GDP and they are able to spend that GDP on healthcare.
To expand on the previous graph, now only the countries with a growth rate of less than 1% are labeled on the y-axis. 15 of the 20 countries are still labeled, showing how many countries spend a significant percentage of their GDP on healthcare measures, such as birth control, also have a pretty low population growth rate. This indicates that healthcare spending strongly influences a population's growth rate.
This is a graph showing the percentage of GDP spent on healthcare for the bottom, the bottom 20 countries. And the countries like that are highlighted in this graph are countries that are not developed, such as Papua New Guinea and Kazakhstan and Pakistan and other countries such as that. And they don't have high GP and they aren't able to spend it on healthcare, and they're also very populous countries.
As shown on the previous graph, we have the 20 countries with the smallest percentage of their GDP spent on healthcare. Now, only just the countries with a growth rate of greater than 1.5% are labeled on the y-axis. 9 of the 20 countries are still labeled, showing how many countries that don't spend a significant percentage of their GDP on healthcare also have a pretty high population growth rate. This reinforces the idea that healthcare spending strongly influences a population's growth rate.
Overall, just to conclude, low average life expectancy leads to a high population growth rate. This just goes into people with countries that have low average life expectancy are usually countries that don't spend a lot on healthcare, have low GDP, aren't able to spend a lot of money on education and other things that contribute to life expectancy, which are undeveloped countries, which leads to usually a high population growth rate in undeveloped countries. And then another fact is a large number of children per family leads to high population. This is pretty self-explanatory. High population growth rate is going to happen when families are having multiple children, lots of children. Low healthcare expenditures lead to high population growth. This gets back to if there's like low amount of GDP spent on healthcare, then there's less access to birth control and less access to education, and that can lead to people that can lead to high population growth rate. And then another thing is really high GDP, such as countries like the United States and China, especially China, can lead to high population growth rate. So it's not necessarily correlated like GDP with population growth rate. It's kind of yeah, it's just not necessarily correlated. And really low GDP can also lead to high population growth rate, which shows how it's not necessarily correlated. Really low GDP, such as like Papua New Guinea or Kazakhstan, those countries have high population growth rate, but also are not thriving and do not have a high GDP.
Thank you. Let us know if you have any questions.